Hey there, YouTube. I'm Ikitsu. This is the Ikitsu Times. Welcome to my channel. Welcome to a little bit of Sins of Solar Empire 2. So today I'm talking about all of the alternate victory conditions that were added in the latest expansion for this game. And I wanted to start off by talking about the things that I think they do really well and the things that make it so that I want them to stay in the game. But I also have a lot of criticisms of them because I think they're a little bit half baked here. So, first of all, let's talk about the Vasari and the Advent victory conditions and why they're really quite good for the game here. So, Sins of Solar Empire 2 is a game where it's possible for two players to get stuck in a situation where you're both really fairly entrenched, and in particular one of you might be playing something like, say, Tech Enclave, where it becomes incredibly dangerous to attack into your opponent because they've got a ridiculous amount of extra like defenses layered in there. For example, a Tech Enclave player could have a planet where they've got 50% extra damage on all of their planetary fortress weapons, all of their defensive weapons, all of those, making it so it's incredibly damaging if you're getting hit by those star bases or what have you. They could have like 3,000 supply of fleet there, maybe even more if there are multiple gravity wells that are adjacent to there. They can actually make it so that it's really hard to push into them without taking crippling losses and getting probably nothing done, even if you throw your entire 2,000 supply fleet into them or 2,400 if you're Vasari, or even 2,600 if you also got the artifact for that. You could end up in a situation where it's just not feasible for you to go into them and attack. And they could have each and every one of their planets fortified to that point. They could be in a situation where they've got phase gates if they've got lucky with the particular spawns of those. They could end up in a situation where it's just impossible to attack into a defensive minded player. It's not just Tech Enclave, but they're the prime culprits for that particular type of gameplay. And if they're using, phase blockers, you could end up in a situation where you can't even like get your fleet back out if things go a little bit sideways. So you could scout that, see that's there, and realize, okay, well, I can't attack that. Especially like they could even have it so that one of their Starbases is rigged so that it's just got the detonate button. That's all it has. It's on the opposite end of the gravity well, so you can't blitz it with an item or an ability that disables it. And that detonates, wipes out your entire fleet. That could even be a possibility. So you're in a situation where you could end up in very long games in Sins of Solar Empire 2. Eventually something will happen and one of the players will break through. But it's a difficult game to sometimes close out in some situations there. So as a result, the not the tech, sorry, the Advent and the Vasari new victory condition is to basically get your command ships, all three of them, equip each of them with an item that's fairly expensive, and have them sit at the sun for 15 minutes. And the importance of this is that it sort of is semi-neutral territory. You can build star bases at the sun and you can push your culture into it, but you can't truly control a star gravity well. And this is really important for this particular type of victory because if one player has gone full on onto the defensive, they've made it so that they're impossible to crack, you can go ahead and you can send your fleet over to that star and you can take it over and you can then just sit there for 15 minutes while your opponent has to respond by sending their fleet. They can't respond by trying to defend or sitting still or doing anything of that sort. They have to attack you and take out one of those command ships. You could, as a response, build a starbase there. The defensive player can't really do that. The reason is that if, in a stellar gravity well, they're usually quite large. And even if your opponent's got two star bases there, which is the maximum defense they could have there, you're allowed to hang out at the opposite end of the gravity well with your star base on the other side, where those star bases are not going to be relevant to the fight at all. And as a result, you can end up in a situation where you're both sitting at each other, staring at each other from opposite ends of the gravity well, but because you've got those items on your command ships, you win. Your opponent has to attack you. They cannot rely on the defensive bonuses or defenses. So it's a good way to close out a game a little bit faster in the event that it was going to turn into a hyper defensive slog, which I think is good. I think that if you've got a situation where that person has got all those defenses, the advantage of that should be that they can use those defenses as a way to sort of passively stop you from attacking into an area without them having to sort of babysit it. And in this particular case, let's say that you've got like two star bases, ton of defensive structures, and full garrison at each and every one of your planets. That's great. That's wonderful. But if your opponent doesn't attack into it, that's not really that important. What you could do in this particular instance is maybe you've got all those defenses sort of layered out everywhere. So you can feel very confident and very safe in using your forces to attack something that your opponent might have very lightly defended, or counterattacking an opponent when they've decided to poke into one of your star bases, knowing that they don't have their full forces available to defend. So that's what you should sort of be using those defenses for. But if you're using it purely for defense, you should actually be. It should be possible to beat you in that particular instance there. Um, I think it's also just good in the sense that it closes out games a little bit faster. I think that it can end up in a situation otherwise where games just take way, way, way too long, and I think that there should be some way to close them out a little bit faster. Now, the Tech Victory, on the other hand, is not like this. While Visari and Advent require you to have your 3 command ships, the Tech one requires you to build a Novolith cannon, install an absolutely ludicrously expensive item onto it, and then fire shots from that Novolith cannon to destroy 5 enemy planets. And this functionally doesn't work. It works sort of against the AI, but not really. And it would not work at all against a real person. So, what sort of is going on with this one? So, in this particular case, it's not the same kind of tiebreaker because you're already building sort of a tech that's designed to be a tiebreaker tech. The Novolith Cannon. The Novolith Cannon is capable of bombarding a planet, dealing 5,000 damage to it, and disabling the structures around it. So you time it so that this is hitting, then your attack wave comes in, blows up like all the planetary defenses while they're disabled, and takes the planet. And if your opponent knows what they're doing, they can defend against that sort of attack just as well. So it's kind of a back and forth sort of thing, but it's definitely going to add a lot of momentum to your attack. The way that the item works is that instead of taking the planet and scraping it of its stuff there so that it just goes neutral, instead it cracks the planet, destroying it permanently. Which does mean that your opponent can't like retake it. It does make it a little bit more difficult for them to get back into the game afterwards, because sometimes you could just like fight off your opponent. They've like blitzed down the planet, but you retake it and then rebuild it, and it's kind of fine. It slows you down economically for a little bit. Not a huge deal in the long run. With this, it cracks the planet and stops you from ever getting the resources from it ever again. But here's the thing about that. The Novolith with the upgrade still does 5,000 damage per shot. A starbase has 10,000 hit points in shields for the planet that's around. And every faction has starbases with shields. And by the time you've got this and they sort of realize maybe you're going for this, they're going to have like a starbase with shields around each of their planets. So you fire off the Planet Cracker shot, it does 5,000 damage out of the 10,000 it needs to. And then you fire off the other one, but it takes 8 minutes to recharge your shot. It's 10,000 hit points for the shield, and it recharges at a rate of 100 every second. Or is it 10 seconds? Either way, by the time you fire it again, it'll have long since recovered 100% of its shields. So you're never actually going to be able to crack it with one Novolith cannon. You will never actually break it in with 2 Novolith cannons. And if it's the right kind of planet, you won't even be able to break it with 3 Novolith cannons. And this is really important for one important reason. You're not necessarily going to be able to bring 4 Novolith cannons online to a single planet. And if you can't do that, there are planets that you will simply never be able to break with Novolith cannons. So how do you take those and actually win with this strategy? Well, the answer is you take your entire fleet and you go attack into the enemy and destroy their star bases. Here's the thing. If you're able to go into your opponent's bases, destroy all their star bases, then hit them with the Novolith cannon after that, you're already in a really strong position to beat them the normal way. In fact, you're weakening your push into the enemy in this case, because what you should be doing is scraping that planet so that you can steal it and then start getting the resources and getting that push, because you can build your 2 star bases there, get your forces rallied, get ready for another push with your increased income, their decreased income. And you've got a new staging point that's safe. You can get all your forces readied up and you can go push into the next system. And you can do that over and over and over again. Whereas with this Novolith cannon, you've just made a neutral territory that stays neutral no matter what. Where you can't use it as a staging point, but your opponent can't defend it either. So you're sort of hopping across 2 blank spots where you potentially are gonna, tip off your enemy that you're coming. I think that not only are you in a situation where you could have just taken the planet yourself normally, because you're destroying all the star bases to begin with, but you're reducing the reward for doing so, making it harder to win the game at the end. And your opponent, if they're good at defending, could just make it so that you never take the planet to begin with. It's all sorts of different things. So it takes longer to get this victory than just get winning conventionally for tech, and it doesn't operate as the same kind of like tiebreaker, because if you're in a really heavy turtle position and your opponent's in a really heavy turtle position, you haven't changed the dynamic at all. You're still in the situation where like neither player can push into the conclusion of the fight at all. So it still kind of sucks there. So yeah, I think that like by far the worst of the victory conditions does belong to tech. But I do have problems with both Advents and Visaris. So they made it so that all of these are fairly basic. I feel like it would be more interesting if there was a little bit, but not much of, like, you want to keep it fairly simple still, of a multi-step process, and I want them to also feel a little bit more thematic to the individual sub-factions, because some of these feel more in line with one of the types of factions and not with the other. A good example is that just mind controlling everybody in the galaxy is kind of more of an Advent Wrath thing. Advent Reborn doesn't really do the mind control thing. Doing the whole blow up everything with a Novolith cannon is very much tech primacy. Tech Enclave is about defending rather than sort of blowing up any planets. And I think they would actually resent the fact that they've destroyed those opportunities for profit by destroying those planets to begin with. For Visari, like, it doesn't feel like it's a victory for them, in the sense like everybody wins. Like if the Visari Exodus like build their 3 command ships, load up their population and all their supplies, and then make their next jump into the void, Tech Enclave wins. Like that's a victory for Tech Enclave because they don't have to deal with the Visari anymore. The Visari don't have to deal with things anymore. Then Tech Enclave also doesn't have to deal with the things anymore. So I think that there are some thematic little things that could be done that could make each of the sub factions more interesting, and to make the victory conditions a little bit more of a story about that as well. So I could go over like what I would do for each of these, and sort of like justify them. But what I want for all of them to ultimately be is you get your command ships, you do like some sort of thing with them, and have them sit at the sun for 15 minutes. And the reason again that I want them all to have that component is we want for those ships to be there so that it can potentially force a neutral territory fight in the super late game where people might have a reason to entrench instead of actually fighting each other, putting it into a position where like there's more dynamic combat rather than just defending, in a super long game, ending the game a little bit earlier. So let's start with the different let's start with the tech ones here, I guess, because they're the ones that would want the most radical change here. So I don't necessarily think that the Novolith cannon idea is necessarily bad for tech primacy. I think that what you would want to do in this particular case is, since we're trying to get them to the sun, I think the justification that you go for here is that you start the quest off, you build a regular Novolith cannon, you fire it at an enemy planet, and you would have this be the test fire phase of the quest. It would be like you would have the thing that would tell you the different steps there. It's build Novolith cannon, fire Novolith cannon, and then after that you'd have like the test data. You'd have a little blurb that would tell you, and then you'd go to the next step there. Basically, it would be like, okay, the power of the Novolith cannon is very impressive. However, it doesn't have enough juice for us to destroy the enemy planets completely, because it doesn't. It's not what it does until you get the upgrade. But instead of just building an upgrade on it and having it fire at enemy planets and doing nothing because they've all got star bases with shields, what you could do is you could have like something called like a stellar Novolith as your sort of final thing there, where you have the components for building that in your 3 command ships. The Kaverikovs all have like modules that are capable of constructing that, and they sort of move over to the star. They build one that harnesses the full power of the star to launch a much more powerful Novolith shell that's capable of destroying like all of the different capital planets from like from that position there. And you'd have maybe you'd have a little cutscene at the end, where like once it's finished, completed building, you've spent 15 minutes there and it's done. it revs up, it fires like shots at each of the different planetary capitals for all the planets that all the enemies that are there, and that ends you the victory. Right? Like, I think that that would be much more interesting. It would be a little bit more thematic, and it would force, again, that sort of same clash at the solar system that we're sort of aiming for here. The next sort of thing that I would sort of do for Tech Enclave is that they're not so much about trying to like blow everybody up with their strategy there. So what they would probably be trying to do is creating some sort of stellar reinforcement where it fortifies the system and prevents people from moving freely through these stellar lanes, creating sort of checkpoints where they're capable of creating like barriers where they can have their fortifications hammer anything that's sort of untowards traveling through the system, making it so that like everything is forced to funnel through the solar area where they would have like the stellar Maginot line or something like that, and that would be like a checkpoint that checks everything, making it so that they can control the trade that goes through there, and they could control the fortifications that go through there, stopping hostiles from getting through. So building that up would be the thing that they would be trying to do over that time. And it would be the sort of same sort of process there. And everyone else would dislike this because it would force their ships to go through this militarized checkpoint where they're not able to act freely or do what they want. It would make it so that there's just complete control by Tech Enclave in terms of control of the flow of goods through the area, which they would love. And it would be, I think, a little bit more thematic for what they're about and what they're trying to do, generally speaking, which is fortify and make money, not blow up planets that potentially are their customers. So I think that that would be a good idea for them. The problem I have is not really knowing what they would do for their first step of that particular thing. It could have to do with like getting enough trade that they would desire doing that kind of thing there. And in particular, you might want to have it so that they've got preliminary trade where they've tested out the concept by getting your star bases in the system with trade nodes. And you know, once they've done that, they realize the potential of controlling stellar trade routes, and then going through that route there. So I think that that would work well for that particular faction. And I do think that like it feels a little bit repetitive, where it's like always results in like you have to sit 15 minutes on the sun. But there are functional reasons again why I want that to be the case. And if someone thinks it's kind of lame that that's always there, but then I think that you could look at different solutions. But I would want those different solutions to still involve some kind of neutral territory fight, rather than forcing the player to like attack into the enemy like Tex does, or forcing the player to like attack into the enemy to prevent it like Tex also does. So yeah, that's kind of my view on that particular thing. So for Vasari, I think that the whole escape thing, like I said, doesn't make any sense. It makes sense in this context if that's what Vasari wants, but there's no reason that the other factions should be opposed to it. So it's not really a loss condition for either of them, which makes it a bit of a problem narratively speaking. And it feels frustrating to like lose in a situation where you're actually winning. I don't like it from a thematic stance there. Now, here's where my sort of gap of knowing exactly what's going on with Vasari Alliance is. But I think for Vasari Exodus, what you could easily do here is have it so that they have to destroy a certain number of planets to harvest the resources from them, because that's the thing that Vasari Exodus really likes doing. This would unlock like sort of resource items for them, which they could then use to like put on their command ships. And after that, they have to go over to the sun, where they would harness the power of the sun and take that with them. Like they would be harvesting enough resources from the sun to seriously destabilize it and make it so that the rest of the solar system is completely screwed. Because this is like that real sort of mentality of them just stealing everything from the planetary system that they've invaded, and then hauling ass to the next one afterwards, without any regards to the local sort of people that are there. Because right now, like it's kind of fine if they leave; it doesn't matter. But if they leave like destroyed planets behind in their wake, and they leave a destroyed sun in their wake, then that's really screwing over the people behind. And there's a really firm reason at that point in time, narratively, why everyone else would want to stop them. Because even if there's another Vasari in the system, like the other kind of Vasari are there, the destruction of the sun really screws them over too, because then they can't get the sort of like power that they want, the resources that they want to get out of that system again. So I think that that kind of system would be far more functional than simply them leaving for no reason. Well, they are leaving for a reason, but everyone else being opposed to that for whatever reason. And I think that that fits like the sort of vibe of Visari Exodus pretty well as well. For Visari Alliance, I don't actually know to what extent they're still trying to leave the galaxy. This is the thing that's a gap in my knowledge about the Visari Alliance lore wise, because my understanding is that they're trying to gather alliances and allies and friends so that they could potentially actually use those as a sort of shield against the thing that they're running away from. I don't know if they intend to stay and fight with their new allies or their new people that they're trying to get along with, or if they're simply using them as a stepping stone to get the resources they need to get out of the system. So, depending on how that sort of goes, I think that you would have something like, say, an influence based system where they're trying to buy out enough resources or influence or something else from some other faction, the independents in particular in this case, to then use those supplies to then leave in the exact same way, like they backstab everybody that was their erstwhile allies by then still siphoning off all the energy from the sun and then just leaving that way. But instead of blowing up planets, they do it by influence to get the initial resources. Or if they're intending to do something else, it could possibly be that they use the solar system as a way to gather up a whole bunch of their allies from those. Like perhaps they would use something where they gather up a whole bunch of allies and they get a whole bunch of like allied ships with their influence from the independents, and they gather up enough of a force and they arrange them at a phase gate at the sun where they would phase those allies over towards the enemies. Why this would be considered a loss for the other people around here could be negligible, but they could also have it so that they're phasing in their enemies into a trap, but they do it in such a way that like not only their the minor factions have to fight them, but the major factions also have to fight them. While the Visari Alliance sort of sit from behind, while they're sort of the people who sort of caused all this mess, they're not actually planning on fighting it. So that could be another way. It depends on what like Visari Alliance is actually trying to do, because I'm not 100% sure about their lore as far as that goes. Now for Advent, taking over everybody just mentally is more of an Advent Wrath thing. I think that Advent Wrath could be about that. And I think that you only need fairly minimal changes if that's the case there. What I would like to see is like this is sort of some sort of psychic propagation, which is reliant on the strength of will of the allied populations that they have. So I would make this somewhat allied population dependent, is how I would change it. Where if they've got a certain percentage of the galaxy's population as allies, they're capable of then powering up the psychic wave required to do what they're doing to control everybody else. And in this particular case, I would probably have it scale based on the number of players that there are. So if there's like 4 players, they need like 30% to be allied or something like that. Whereas if there's just 2 players, they would have to have like 60% or something along those lines. So you'd always need a little bit more than your fair share of the population in the solar system as a as allied. But yeah, you don't need to have like half of it if you're in a 10-player lobby or something like that. And then you'd still, of course, have to like get your just your Oblivias, and you'd have to have them control the sun for 15 minutes as well. So you'd have to do both of those things, as well as have an amplifier item that propagates the psi wave culture across the solar system as well. So I think that just a minor adjustment to that one would make it sort of a little bit more thematic, a little bit more dynamic and fun, as opposed to just build the item stand there, which I think is a little bit lame. But it's Advent Reborn that I think is a little bit more difficult, because they're not so much about trying to control everybody in the galaxy. Like they care a lot less about that sort of thing. So what I would probably do for them is actually some sort of like something related to their homeworld and some need to like fulfill some kind of prophecy sort of thing. What I would probably do for them is like once you get to Civilian Tech 5, you unlock a new set of tiers for your expeditions, your explorations. So you'd be able to get like some exotics and stuff like that, but they'd be very, very expensive, like higher tier explorations of your homeworld. And once you sort of uncovered those, they would reveal some sort of prophecy that you would then have to fulfill. So you then have to go out and you probably like unveil three artifacts, and you would put those on your justicios, and then fly off to the sun as a part of completing that prophecy, where they ascend or something like that, creating some sort of like destruction wave that does some abstract thing. I don't know what it would actually be. Realistically, they don't really care about their opponents, and that makes it a bit difficult. So it could be like they'd have to do something that wipes out some of their opponents or something like that, or does something to them just so that it makes it feel like it's a loss for the other groups there. But if they do that, like I think it would be a little bit harder to figure out what they would have to do that would harm everyone else, because like they do want to harm other people, like don't get me wrong, but their first and foremost priority is not that. It is first and foremost like their return to their home world and the resurrection of the Advent peoples. So I think that that's more that they do still want to spread the unity, but they don't really care about that as much as like Advent Wrath. So but yeah, like I think that those sort of things would just make it so that each individual sub faction felt a little bit more unique and a little bit more flavorful. It would add a little bit more character to each of these, but importantly, it would also add another step. I think that when you're playing the game and you suddenly got like, hey, there's 15 minutes before you lose, you have to scramble your entire fleet over to the sun. It's could actually be very easy to lose just because it's not possible to really react to that in time. Like you get like your opponent just waits till you get caught in a gravity well with a phase jump inhibitor, and they just like keep building phase jump inhibitors around there or something like that. They just keep your fleet like trapped in a spot that's as far away from the sun as possible, while they've just got their three command ships by themselves over there. Like, what do you really do about that situation? Like, you know, maybe it's fun that they sort of like trapped you there and suddenly win because they outplayed you that way, but I think it would be much better if there were those multiple steps, because it would make it so that it's like, hey, they've completed the step to completing this factional victory, just as a heads up sort of thing. And then you still have the time where they have to rebuild those items, and then you have the time where they have to get their fleet over to the sun, and then they have to actually get the other thing done there. So by making that extra step there, that has that time where they have to build all those items afterwards, which we could make take a fairly long amount of time and cost a lot of resources, which they should. That gives you a lot of time where you're capable of reacting to that and figuring out what you're going to do about it, which I think would be a more interesting thing to have happen with that particular victory type. Because again, we're trying to make it so that like both players have to fight over that solar system. And while it does eliminate some of the mind game elements that you could do to try and trick someone into going somewhere they don't need to be so that you can slip your command ships over there, I think that's a super lame way to win the game to begin with. So I would much rather it be built around, you know, doing something a little bit more dynamic, a little bit more confrontational, given the way that we're trying to make these victory conditions work to begin with. So anyhow, that's my thoughts on the alternate victory conditions. I don't like them very much. I think that they're a little bit half-baked. And I think that, realistically speaking, I'm probably not going to bother playing with them turned on most of the time. But in any event, though, that's my thoughts on the matter. Hope you found this one enjoyable. And of course, as always, hope to see you guys all next time.